"Stop, who are you?" The shout thundered through the vast aircraft maintenance hangar in San Diego as Rear Admiral Matthew Kane suddenly removed his safety helmet, stood at rigid attention, and saluted a civilian inventory clerk. Just minutes earlier, a group of young sailors had been laughing, mocking the faint tattoo on the back of her neck, assuming it was nothing more than the logo of a motorcycle gang. They had no idea it was the emblem of an ultra-classified unit that had lost 8 out of its 12 members in a deadly mission. And the woman standing before them had once been one of them. Morning at the North Island Naval Base always began with a symphony all its own. The crash of waves against the pier, the wind carrying the sting of salt mingled with the sharp tang of jet fuel, and somewhere in the distance, the steady metallic rhythm of tools striking steel from the maintenance bays. But woven into that industrial chorus was another cadence precise, deliberate coming from a corner of the massive supply hangar where Emily Hart worked. On paper, she was unremarkable. A civilian contractor responsible for managing inventory for the F/A-18 squadron. Just one name among hundreds. Yet, to anyone paying attention, she moved through the aisles like a perfectly programmed machine. Not a wasted motion, not a single step out of place. A 40-pound parts crate went to the top shelf in her hands as easily as if it were a box of cookies. Day after day, it was the same. Sign the ledger, scan the barcode, seal the box. Repeat a dozen times until the clock struck quitting hour. Then she would leave the base, drive her aging silver sedan back to a small apartment in Chula Vista, eat dinner alone, no television, no Facebook, no Instagram. Her life was as orderly as the rows of shelving she tended, and just as quiet. The new sailors most barely out of high school looked at her the way one might regard a piece of fixed equipment on base. A woman approaching 40, hair pinned back in a neat bun, eyes carrying a constant fatigue. Sometimes they whispered, just loud enough to be heard, but not enough to be called out, "Warehouse warden, shelf sheriff." A few joked she must be training for the world championship of stacking boxes. Emily didn't react. Not because she didn't hear, but because nothing in it was worth an answer. She kept working, pencil tucked behind her ear, inventory list in hand. Every now and then, when she bent to lift a crate or reached for a high shelf, the collar of her coveralls would shift, revealing a faint shadow of ink at the nape of her neck. A circle enclosing outstretched wings, etched in sharp black lines. It wasn't like any fashionable tattoo. No roses, no Latin quotes favored by college kids. It was something else enough to make a few young sailors snicker and spin stories. A motorcycle gang emblem, a clan crest from Call of Duty. And each time she heard that laughter, Emily would simply tug the collar back up, eyes fixed on her checklist. If anything changed, it was the slight tightening of her jaw, too subtle for anyone to notice. None of them knew that, somewhere else, in another time, men had once bowed their heads to that tattoo. That it wasn't the mark of a game, but the insignia of a group who rarely lived long enough to tell their story. Outside the hangar doors, the wind from San Diego Bay swept in, carrying the distant call of a ship's horn. In the cold white light of the fluorescence, Emily Hart looked like any other warehouse worker. Faded coveralls, scuffed steel-toe boots, a lean but unremarkable frame. Except to those who had once stood beside her in a storm history would never record, they would never mistake her for anyone else. She remained silent, invisible amid the banter of the young sailors. But some things, once carved into the blood, never fade. And that tattoo hidden beneath the gray fabric was still there, like a secret waiting to be seen.
Welcome to Veteran Silent Story, where forgotten battles come alive in powerful tales. Subscribe now and honor the silence that shaped our freedom.
Audit day at the North Island Naval Base always carried its own particular strain of tension. Hangar floors were polished until they gleamed as if for a parade. Manifests were combed through down to the last decimal, and officers suddenly became uncharacteristically polite. But no one had expected the arrival of Rear Admiral Matthew Kane, a man in the Navy's logistics circles compared to an X-ray scanner. Wherever he looked, he found the flaw. Kane was not loud, tall and lean, with long, steady strides and eyes so cold they seemed capable of stripping the paint from an aircraft just by looking at it. Rumor had it that, during an inspection in Yokosuka, he spotted a misrecorded serial number on a component from more than 20 paces away. To him, numbers never lied, only people did. The inspection team moved through each section, from maintenance bays, to the fuel depot, to the technical records archive. With each stop, the air seemed to grow heavier. The officers walking alongside him began to show the telltale signs of unease, jaws tightening, shoulders tensing. By the time they stepped into the inventory warehouse, Emily Hart's domain, a few of them were taking deep, deliberate breaths, as though the scent of hydraulic fluid might somehow mask their anxiety. The warehouse chief, confident in Emily's precision yet unable to hide a trace of apprehension, made the introduction. "Sir, this is Miss Hart. She manages the entire civilian inventory for the squadron. Every single bolt in here, she knows exactly where it is." Kane gave a brief nod, his gaze sweeping over the towering shelves where thousands of crates and boxes stood in perfect alignment, an arrangement so precise it bordered on visual art. He seemed satisfied but said nothing. Emily, as always, kept working. She pulled a heavy crate from a low rack, her forearms tightening beneath the worn gray fabric of her coveralls. And then, in a motion so small no one else noticed, her collar shifted. The cold white glare of the fluorescent lights fell directly on the nape of her neck, revealing a shadowed black circle enclosing a pair of sharply spread wings. The lines etched deep, as though they had been there a lifetime. Kane stopped. His eyes froze on that tattoo. It was not the look of idle curiosity, it was the flash of memory returning in full force. Memories of something most of the world had never heard of. And of those who had, most were no longer alive. He removed his safety helmet, the movement deliberate, holding it to his chest like a ritual. The entire team halted. The quiet tapping of pencils against clipboards ceased. No one understood what was happening. They only saw the famously cold Admiral suddenly standing at attention in a way that felt different. His voice, low but so clear it carried across the warehouse, broke the silence. "That is the Valkyrie cipher." The air turned to ice. The young sailors who had been mocking Emily just days earlier stood frozen, as though caught committing a forbidden act. Somewhere in the back, someone muttered, What's Valkyrie?" But no answer came. Emily did not turn around. Her hands still gripped the crate as she set it on the inspection table with her usual care. But a single muscle in her jaw twitched. She knew that look. It had been a long time, but she remembered it well. The look of survivors recognizing each other by a sign that required no words. The Valkyrie cipher was no trendy tattoo. It was the seal of a unit that did not exist on paper. 12 had worn it. 8 lay forever in places the maps did not mark. And one of the remaining 4 was now standing in front of Kane, her hands still stained with steel dust and the smell of machine oil. Kane lowered his helmet. His eyes were no longer those of an auditing official but of a soldier standing before a sacred emblem. He knew that if this mark appeared here, it was no coincidence. And if she was indeed who he thought she was, everything was about to change. In the vast warehouse, the fans still whirred, the metal still rang. But for those present, it was as if the world had tilted ever so slightly. They didn't know why, but they sensed deep down that the woman before them was not merely the warehouse warden. There are names that never appear on the evening news, yet are etched deep into classified files read by only a select few. Valkyrie was one of those names. No designation, no official insignia, no presence on any organizational chart. 12 individuals, hand-picked from across the branches of special operations, forged into a single unit with the skills to infiltrate, rescue, and vanish before anyone could understand what had happened. Each member carried a code name, a story, and a single tattoo. A black circle encasing a pair of outstretched wings, inked with lines as sharp as a blade cut into stone. Only 12 had ever worn it. Now, only 4 remained alive. Emily Hart had been known in that world as Spectre. Not because she enjoyed hiding, but because she was so skilled she could disappear in plain sight, even when standing just a few steps from her target. Many of her missions were never reported. They simply slipped into the dark, as though they had never happened at all. Then came nightfall, the Persian Gulf, 5 years ago. On paper, it was nothing more than an intelligence-gathering operation. But Emily and her team knew something was wrong from the very first step. The intel had been compromised, the exfiltration routes cut off, and instead of a single target, they faced an entire network lying in wait. When night fell, 8 of them never got back up. Only 4 survived, each scattering in a different direction. 2 were pulled out, 1 vanished, and 1 Spectre disappeared completely. No discharge papers, no farewell, just a single line in the report. Operation concluded. Asset inactive. Location unknown. Kane knew better than anyone. He was the one who had signed the deployment order for Nightfall, based on intelligence he later learned had been manipulated. Every face from that unit had become a cut in his memory. And perhaps the deepest cut of all was Spectre's the one who never returned to hear his apology. For 5 years, Kane had never sought her out. Not because he couldn't, but because he understood. Someone like Spectre did not want to be found. If she had vanished, it was because she had chosen to bury it all. But now, everything had changed. Not because of an order from the Department of Defense, not because of a new Black Ops mission, but because a man was desperate to save his daughter. Dr. Robert Mallon, a bioweapons scientist, had been reported dead alongside Valkyrie during the night of Nightfall. In truth, he had survived by vanishing under another name. And just last week, he surfaced in Houston, carrying information on a new generation of nerve toxin, something that, in the wrong hands, could kill millions. Mallon said he would hand the data to one person only. The one who had shadowed him through that chaotic night, the one he knew only by her codename Spectre. Kane had no choice. He trusted no one in the current network, especially when he knew it had been compromised from the inside. The only way to get Mallon and his daughter out alive was to find Emily Hart. There was just one problem. Emily was now simply the warehouse lady at the base, living quietly in Chula Vista, seemingly severed from her old world entirely. No weapons, no contacts, no trail for anyone to follow. Kane knew that if he took even one wrong step, she would vanish again, and this time, it would be forever. In the instant he saw that tattoo under the fluorescent lights, Kane understood that his only chance was standing right in front of him. But how do you convince someone who has chosen the shadows to step back into the place that took everything from them? In another corner of the warehouse, Emily stacked the last crate neatly into place, unaware that the walls she had built around herself for the past 5 years had just begun to crack. The conversation took place in a quiet corner of the warehouse, yet the air between them was as thick as if they were standing in the eye of a storm. Kane spoke briefly, without circling around, like a man who had waited far too long to say these words. The name Robert Mallon stirred no pleasant memory for Emily, only a shadowy figure in the darkness of nightfall and the echo of gunfire somewhere far away. Now he was alive. Not just alive, but carrying a secret that could shake the entire world. The formula for a new nerve toxin, a substance so lethal that just a few grams could turn a city into a graveyard. Mallon had declared he would hand the data over to Spectre. Not to the military, not to an elite strike team, but to her. Emily stood still, her eyes like a deep lake, unmoved by the wind. Then her answer came firm, cold. She was done. Her war had ended long ago. Kane wasn't surprised, but he did not look away. Throughout his career, he had learned to read the silences in people, and this silence weighed more than most. He knew he needed a decisive blow, something that could pierce the armor she had built over the last 5 years. He spoke of Malon's daughter, 7 years old, with her father, and the hunters would not spare her. The impact did not come immediately, but Kane saw something stir at the corner of Emily's eyes. It could have been the faces of those who had marched into darkness with her. It could have been the ragged breathing of someone over the radio when everything in Nightfall fell apart. It could have been the memory of another child's eyes she had once sworn to protect. Emily turned away, as if the fluorescent light above had suddenly grown too bright. Part of her wanted to walk out that very moment, to leave Kane and everything he represented behind. But the image, the little girl, 7 years old, knowing nothing of the world, clung to her like a shadow. She drew in a deep breath. The past did not rest. It only lay still, waiting for a reason big enough to rise. Kane said nothing more, did not press. He knew that in these moments, silence carried more power than any argument. Only the steady hum of the ventilation fans, and somewhere in the distance the faint clang of metal from another corner of the hangar. Finally, Emily turned back. The look in her eyes was no longer that of the warehouse lady on base. There was a change, almost invisible, but Kane recognized it instantly, the cold focus of an operative weighing a mission. "One time," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear. "Only this time." It was not an ordinary agreement. It was a contract, a binding clause between two people who had once stood on opposite ends of a tragedy, now looking toward the same objective. Kane nodded, slowly, as though afraid a hurried motion might shatter this fragile accord. Emily asked nothing of the details, nothing of the plan. It wasn't time yet. She only knew that if she had said one time, she would see it through, no matter the cost. Outside, dusk settled over the base. The sound of waves from San Diego Bay drifted in, a reminder that time was moving. They both left the warehouse, each carrying a piece of the past that had never truly closed. Emily walked toward her car, feeling as if a thin veil had just been torn away, exposing something she had tried to bury. Kane watched her go, fully aware that from this moment on, the wheel had begun to turn and it would not stop until the mission was done. 3 days later, deep inside the Pentagon, a windowless room glowed under a cold, unfeeling light. On the table, each firearm lay neatly in place like instruments waiting for the musician's hands. Emily, now once more Spectre, sat before them, her movements slow but certain. Fingers drifted along barrels, tested the smooth slide of the chambers, gripped the stocks as if feeling for the heartbeat of an old friend. Beside them sat forged passports, each carrying a name, a nationality, and an invented life story, an encrypted phone, a palm-sized listening device, a folding knife with a blade thin as moonlight. She worked in silence, no wasted motion, as if she had never left this world at all. This mission was unlike any she had taken before, not to destroy, not to capture, but to pull a man and a child from the tightening snare around them. Malon and his daughter Lila were hiding in New Orleans, a city of jazz, rum, and narrow streets carved with shadows. But it held something else. Argos. Argos was no government agency. It was a private intelligence syndicate, steered by Elias Thorne, an ex-CIA official with eyes like the edge of a dagger. He hunted not only for money, he hunted for power. And Malon, along with the data he carried, was the most valuable prize on his board. Spectre entered New Orleans as an art collector. A cream linen dress, oversized sunglasses, a leather crossbody bag stuffed with auction catalogs. She walked the cobblestone streets of the French Quarter, blending into the tide of tourists, snapping photos and eating beignets. From time to time, she paused at a gallery window, just long enough for Argos to believe they were watching a harmless traveler. But she saw everything. 2 men in Hawaiian shirts on the far corner, earpiece wires tucked beneath their hat brims, a black SUV parked exactly 1 block from the French market, and a couple pretending to shop for souvenirs but never taking their eyes off a single point. The net was not drawn too tight, a mistake made by hunters convinced their prey was already worn down. The opportunity came on a damp morning, when mist from the Mississippi drifted through the stalls of the French market. Spectre sat at an outdoor cafe, a steaming espresso in front of her, eyes sweeping each entrance. And then she saw it, a red balloon floating above the crowd. Beneath it, a dark-haired girl walking beside a man she recognized instantly, Malin. He was thinner than she remembered, but his eyes held the same quiet vigilance. Spectre rose and slipped into the current of people. When she was close enough, she spoke a single sentence in a language only the two of them had ever shared. Malin gave the smallest nod, his shoulders easing as if shedding a few pounds of weight. Lila looked at her with open curiosity, unaware this woman was her living shield. The relief lasted only seconds. Malin's voice was low. The data he carried was only half. The rest was held by a journalist, someone hiding far beyond Argos's reach. And he would give it to no one until Lila was out of the United States. Spectre understood instantly. This was not a simple get-them-out operation. It was a two-step game, each step with the power to collapse the whole. She glanced over her shoulder and saw one of the Hawaiian shirtmen break position, his hand pressed to his earpiece. Time was running out. She took Lila's hand, returning the red balloon as a silent signal. From now on, you do not let go. Malin stayed close behind, head lowered like any tourist seeking shade. They exited the market through a narrow alley onto Decatur Street, melting into the press of bodies around a street band's brassy rhythm. Argos was still there, but not yet moving in. Spectre knew the next move would be where things truly turned dangerous. And this time, if she miscalculated, it would not be one life that paid the price, but two. Spectre's plan was not a detailed map, with dozens of contingency routes. It was more like a thin wire stretched across a chasm. One wrong step, and everything would plunge into the abyss. But that was the kind of plan she trusted. Simple, audacious, and aimed straight at the blind spot of the enemy. The only way out for Lila was the Mississippi River. Its murky brown waters, heavy with the smell of silt, would carry the girl to the Gulf and from there into safe territory. Spectre knew an old fisherman in Chalmette, a man she had once saved from an arrest in Honduras. He owed her a life, and in this world, debts like that were never forgotten. But the Mississippi was not something you could approach freely. Argos had eyes on every dock. The only way to get Lila aboard was to make them look elsewhere. That night, as New Orleans drowned in light and the wail of jazz horns, a fire erupted in the warehouse district east of the city. Flames devoured the darkness, black smoke coiling upward like a towering pillar. At the same time, police received an anonymous tip about a foreign hostage being held there. Minutes later, Argos's network shifted, their entire force flooding east. While the city's gaze was fixed on the inferno, Spectre quietly led Lila to the Chalmette pier. The girl clutched the red balloon now tied to her backpack as a signal no dockhand could mistake. The fisherman's boat slipped away before dawn's first light. Lila looked back, her eyes wide, but she did not cry. Malin stood on the pier, hands clenched, eyes locked on the vessel until its light vanished into the river mist. Spectre touched his shoulder, her voice low but steady. Now it's our turn. They left the pier, moving through streets still damp with morning fog toward St. Louis Cathedral, a white-faced, triple-spired landmark stabbing into the gray sky. This was the meeting point, with the journalist holding the rest of the data. In this space, history and shadow intertwined, and tonight it would witness an exchange known to no one but them. But Argos had tracked them. No noisy assault, no dramatic charge, only shadows slipping in from narrow alleys, the whisper of rubber soles on stone, so quiet it was almost unnatural. In the chapel, candlelight flickered against the saint's statue, casting deep pools of darkness. Spectre sensed the movement before she saw it. When Argos's commander stepped from behind a stone column, hand on the grip of his weapon, she was already within striking range. Her strike came like lightning, a sharp arm sweep that dropped him before he could draw. The sound of his body hitting the floor was barely more than a book falling onto carpet. She didn't pause to admire the work. She slipped out through a side passage, merging into the growing crowd of tourists, spilling into Jackson Square. Malin received from the journalist a USB drive so small it could be hidden in the palm of his hand. The two halves of the data were finally together. He said nothing, only gave the messenger a nod, a gesture equal parts gratitude and farewell. Outside, a black SUV with navy plates idled at the curb. As Malin climbed in, the first light of morning spilled across the cathedral's roof, washing the square in pale gold. Spectre did not join him. She had already vanished into the narrow back streets, as if she had never been there at all. Argos would keep hunting, but tonight's quarry had slipped beyond their reach. And somewhere on the Mississippi, a red balloon still drifted lazily, carrying with it a promise that had been kept. 48 hours later, the Norfolk Naval Base lay in the quiet calm of an autumn morning. On Rear Admiral Kane's desk sat a report barely 10 pages thick, yet its weight was enough to alter the fate of millions. The data Malin and the journalist had brought back had been decrypted. Federal agencies had moved immediately to neutralize the threat. A bioweapon that had never quite come into existence was now buried forever. Malin and Lila, under witness protection, had been relocated to Canada. There, among the blazing red maples, they reunited with what remained of their family, a new beginning, far from the shadows that had been hunting them. Kane closed the file and looked out the window, where autumn leaves spun in slow spirals, knowing his part was done. And Emily Hart? She kept the promise she had made from the start. She did not return to the unit. She allowed no one to pin a medal on her chest. There was no celebration, no speech of praise. On the day she left Norfolk, she left nothing behind but a thin envelope for Kane, with a single line inside. "Thank you. See you in another life." A month later, Emily appeared on the coast of Oregon. No one in the small seaside town knew of Spectre, or Valkyrie, or Nightfall. They only saw a woman nearing 40, renting a small wooden house facing the Pacific and taking a job at the local weather station. Her new work was simple: measure wind speed, record rainfall, and occasionally radio the center when a storm approached. Each morning, the crash of waves against the cliffs woke her before the alarm. Seagulls cried hoarsely overhead. Emily stood on her balcony, a mug of hot coffee in hand, watching the mist lift from the surface of the sea. No helicopters, no commands over the radio, no ticking countdown. Only wind, waves, and the stillness she had once believed she would never find again. Then one autumn afternoon, when the air had turned crisp and the maples began painting the road to the shore in gold, a small envelope appeared in her mailbox. No return address. Inside was a postcard. On the front, a photograph of a dark-haired girl, smiling as if she could embrace the whole sky, standing before a roaring white waterfall. In her hand was a red balloon, bright against the deep green of nature behind her. Emily turned it over. Just a few carefully written lines, in the rounded letters of a child's hand. "The sparrow's home. Thank you, Lila." No other words, but Emily needed none. She sat in the wooden chair on her porch, the postcard in her hand, letting the ocean wind run through her hair. A faint smile touched her lips, a warmth both near and far settling in her chest. Her hand drifted unconsciously to the nape of her neck, where the Valkyrie tattoo lay quiet beneath her sweater. For years it had been a mark of loss, a reminder of the Nightfall mission and the 8 who had never returned, but now it no longer carried the same weight. It had become the emblem of a promise to protect, even if it meant disappearing into the dark, and to keep that promise to the very end. Over the sea, the sunset began to pull a band of gold and crimson down to the horizon. Emily sat still, watching the sun sink, letting the waves and wind erase the last echoes of the past. The ghost could rest now, and if, one day, someone were to ask, "Who is Spectre?" perhaps the only answer would be, a woman who once kept her promise. "You're done, Shaw. Get out of my range." Erin Shaw didn't argue. She simply nodded, closed the flap of the old canvas bag that held her M40, and walked away as if she'd just received a death sentence from someone who used to be on her side. In the world of Navy SEALs, silence is often mistaken for weakness. But some choose silence because they've seen too much. And sometimes, the ones who get cast out are the very ones holding a truth the system is too afraid to face. If you've ever been pushed out of the one place you were best at, this story is for you. The order cracked like a dry bullet through the blazing noon heat of Fort Irwin. Desert winds whipped steadily across the distant, silent shooting targets. Aaron Shaw stood motionless. No protest, no second glance, not even a breath too loud. Just a nod, small, deliberate, like someone who had heard those words 100 times in her head, and now they simply arrived on cue. She packed up her weathered fabric bag, every movement so practiced it almost carried its own soundtrack. It was a faded Molly field bag, worn like she was her only possession, that no one ever asked where she got it or what she kept inside, because, truthfully, no one cared. Erin was the weird woman everyone assumed had ended up in the wrong training facility. A few glances trailed behind her, not in respect but with quiet irritation. She was too still, too unreadable. In a place where people shouted to be seen, her silence felt like an insult. She walked slowly across the sand where sweat, gunpowder, and bruised egos mixed into the dirt. Her combat boots made no sound. That, if you asked anyone here, was not normal. But to Aaron Shaw, former Navy SEAL, it wasn't a choice. It was instinct. And maybe that's why she was pulled from the training course for performers. Drill Sergeant Bennett, the one who just dismissed her from the firing range, turned back to the score sheet. A crease above his brow deepened more than usual. He wouldn't admit it, but he was confused. Not because she missed a shot, but because she fired so few and said even less. Aaron was deemed too slow. Fair enough. She never rushed the line, never grabbed the best rifle. She chose the farthest corner, the longest range, and waited, as if something in the wind was the real target. Back in her SEAL days, she had a call sign Echo Shadow, a name no one dared speak since 2017. But here, at Fort Irwin, she was just Aaron, a failed trainee. A broken wing sent here for show. The truth is, every training facility needs a few examples of failure to keep the new ones in line. She passed the logistics tent. A young private cleaning his rifle spit into the sand as she walked by a quiet ritual of rejection. She didn't react. Instead, she bent down and picked up a single intact 7.62 round forgotten in the sand. She brushed the dust off the casing with her sleeve, then slipped it into her pocket like it meant something. What could she say? That she had once fired at double the range? That she had saved a Green Beret unit with a single bullet through a ventilation shaft? Number. Because here, none of that was in the curriculum. And if it's not in the book, it doesn't exist. Erin placed the bag down on her iron-framed bunk in the women's barracks. The room was empty, save for the steady hum of a ceiling fan and the faint scent of rusted metal. She sat down, unlaced the worn-down heels of her boots, and pulled from her bag a folded, creased paper, an old topographic map of a firing zone in Pakistan. She stared at it for a few seconds, not out of nostalgia, but as if testing herself, checking whether her memory still held. A yell rang out from the yard. "Who left this brass casing on the sand, damn it?" Aaron smiled softly. For the first time that day, maybe the first time that month. She rose quietly, stepped toward the door, hand gripping the strap of her old rifle case. On the body of her M40 sniper rifle, nearly erased by time, was the fading inscription, Echo Shadow. No one here knew what it truly meant. And maybe that was the safest thing for them.
Welcome to Veteran Silent Story, where forgotten battles come alive in powerful tales. Subscribe now and honor the silence that shaped our freedom.
Early mornings at Fort Irwin don't come with birdsong or falling leaves. only the sluggish hum of diesel generators and the moisture clinging to the warehouse windows. Erin Shaw woke up 90 minutes earlier than the others, as if her body still operated in a different time zone, perhaps Iraq, or somewhere even further, where people didn't measure time by hours, but by how many times they survived. She left the bed quietly, folding her blanket exactly like in the training manuals, then walked to the M40 rifle by her bedside. In the yellowed fluorescent light of the barracks, the rifle didn't gleam, it absorbed the light. Erin placed her hand on the rifle not to check it, but out of habit, the way someone might reach for the pendant of a loved one long gone. Beneath the worn paint under the barrel was a faint line of etched characters, hand-pressed, crude yet precise. 33°4, 713, N68°4, 939E. Coordinates only those who'd been deployed would recognize. A stretch of rocky hills east of Ghazni, Afghanistan. A place not found in travel brochures nor on most standard maps. She engraved it not to remember, but to never forget what she had left behind. Just below the coordinates was a strange marking, ES0417. Simply the date and her call sign, Echo Shadow. No one at Fort Irwin knew, but in the Navy's covert operations circles, that name once made an entire command unit delay a mission for 72 hours just to wait for her to finish observing. Erin once served under direct orders from the Joint Special Operations Command, with clearance levels far beyond anything discussed in any American classroom. But here, now, she was the one folding blankets, cleaning weapons, taking out the trash, nothing more, nothing less. And strangely, that seemed to give her peace. Maybe the deepest pain isn't being forgotten, it's being remembered. Wrong. At Fort Irwin, she was that quiet stranger, the trainer without a clear rank, the demoted SEAL. They called her names like Ghost Lady, Silent Shot, or worse, Miss, assuming she missed every target. But Erin never reacted. Once a trainee tripped over her pack and joked, "What is this? A landmine?" Erin just glanced, no smile, no anger. Just a look that made the young soldier step back. He never joked again. Erin had no friends on base. She ate lunch alone, trained during off hours, and went to bed before the rest turned off the lights. People called her strange, but in truth she was simply moving at the pace her body had learned, living a life programmed for survival, not conversation. There was only one place she visited regularly, the old weapons room, where red paint marked bullet trajectories on faded mock-ups. She went there just after others had left, and often stood motionless in front of a rough wooden board where a single bullet hole had carved deep into the edge, the scar of a missed shot. No one knew that, to her, it was the only shot she ever regretted. Once, a young lieutenant, full of curiosity, asked if she had ever shot someone for real. Erin didn't answer. Instead, she placed a single bullet on the table and quietly walked away. That bullet was etched with the words, "Time is the trigger." That phrase had once been the tactical motto of an independent strike group not officially part of any military unit, a group erased from all records in 2019. Erin was the last one left, not because she was the best, but because she knew when to stop. People often expect protagonists to recount their past with tears, with cries of pain, but Erin never spoke, because her past didn't need belief. It only needed to be carried with her rifle, her folded map, her bullet in the pocket. The quietest weapon isn't a gun, it's absolute precision in choosing when to remain silent. That afternoon, the sky over Fort Irwin sank low, as if even time itself had grown tired. The sand had cooled, the wind began to move in steady rhythms, and the sunset cast a bronze tint across the surface of the cold rifle. No one noticed when Erin left the barracks. No footsteps, no asking for permission. She simply vanished like the wind itself, silent, precise, leaving behind nothing but a faint glint on the strap of her faded backpack. The 1,800-meter sniper range sat far from the main camp, a place even the best shooters often skipped, not worth the time, they'd say. Out there, the target wasn't much more than a dot, hanging in a blur of sand winds and trembling air. That distance didn't just test marksmanship, it tested belief. Aaron arrived when no one else remained, except for two old crows fighting over a forgotten piece of sandwich. She sat quietly, opened her cloth bag, and began assembling the M40 as if reattaching a long-lost limb. No rush, no wasted movement. Every action played like a wordless piece of music, where breath became the metronome for something deeper within. She mounted the scope, tightened the bolt, wiped the dust from the body, not to make it shine, but to clear her mind. Then she took out exactly 3 bullets, no more. She placed herself into the prone position, head low, eye through the scope, one hand on the stock, the other gently resting on the trigger. No whispered prayer, no final words, just focus. The first shot rang out a sharp ping, echoing like a bronze bell, striking the silence left by earlier disdain. A tight group of hits, no deviation, not even half an inch. The second shot. Again. Ping. No cheers. No teammates clapping her back. Only the shift of the wind and 2 crows now sitting still, as if sensing something unusual was unfolding. The third shot was the quietest of all. Not because it was softer, but because the world around it seemed to pause, just to listen, and then ping, the third. 3 rounds. 3 solid hits, at a range that many self-proclaimed sharpshooters wouldn't even dare to attempt. From a distance, a few trainees finishing their exercises caught sight of her. They didn't approach, but they saw. One reached to tap the shoulder of another, then simply nodded. No one said, "She's good." They didn't have to. Their eyes said everything. Erin stood up, cleaned her rifle, closed the bag. She didn't glance back at the target. She didn't check the results. Because she knew. Her ears had caught that unmistakable sound. It wasn't 3 bullseyes. It was 3 answers spoken for 3 years of silence. She walked away, just as she came, leaving behind nothing but faint ripples in the sand, and an afternoon that had been made silent. That evening, in a small instructor conference room, security footage from the sniper range was rewound. A cluster of trainers stood around the monitor, none saying a word. Sergeant Bennett, the one who'd once thrown her off the range, tightened his grip on the pen in his hand. He wouldn't admit it, but his face looked like a man trying to drink ice water with a steel spoon. Uncomfortable, but just the right kind of cold. No one could explain why she'd chosen the 1,800-meter range. No announcement, no audience, no fanfare. But maybe that was what kept them up that night. As for Erin, she folded her blanket to a precise 45-degree crease, returned the rifle to its spot by her bedside, and lit a small stick of incense pulled from her inner pocket. Not fragrant, not sharp, just enough to let the smoke drift gently into the dusty ceiling above. It was like her memories. Never announced, never discussed, but always there. She didn't smile. But her hand brushed the empty bullet pouch, a gesture almost unconscious, like an old soul running their thumb across a worn photo inside a wallet. Those 3 bullets weren't just skill, they were response. Dear audience, grab a glass of water, take a moment to relax, and keep listening to the story. The twists are still to come. And please drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a joy to see who's joining us from around the world. Drop a 1 in the comments if you find this story gripping, so we can keep bringing you more captivating tales. From that afternoon onward, after the 3 shots echoed and the entire range fell into a stunned silence, Erin needed to do nothing more. Her silence accomplished what volumes of lectures had never managed. It made people stop laughing and start listening. No one asked Erin anything. Yet they began observing her more closely, from the way she walked across the sandy grounds, to how she cleaned her rifle, to how she gazed into the sky before each session. They started to realize that the small details once dismissed as slow or unenthusiastic were in fact the foundation of precision. Sergeant Bennett, the one who had loudly booted her off the range, had grown noticeably quieter these days. Perhaps that video from the range still ran in his mind, rewinding those 3 pings like a classical melody he never learned. No one forced him to admit fault. Still, since that day, he ceased making comments whenever she entered the training area. Strangely, Erin didn't capitalize on her accidental fame. She didn't take a seat at the instructor's table, didn't take the podium, didn't write on any board. She remained the woman who cleaned guns early, folded blankets meticulously, and always chose to eat last. Then, one day, a recruit approached her. He was small, with a southern drawl, the same recruit who had once called her Miss. He came forward while she was disassembling her rifle in the maintenance room and asked quietly, "How do you read the wind?" Erin didn't answer immediately. She simply raised her index finger smeared with gun oil into the air, not to show off, but to feel. Then she turned towards the sandy range and furrowed her brow as though listening to something the rest could not. The next day, the recruit returned, then another, then a small group. Teachings had not been formally assigned, yet somehow Erin became the person everyone sought to learn from. And so she began teaching not with chalkboards, not with slides, not with PowerPoint, just sessions held outside the range, her hands pointing at dust and light. Just phrases like, "The grass doesn't tremble, but the wind still moves." Or, "Slow breath is the golden hour." Erin's classroom started to take shape. People lined up for it. No one laughed. Many didn't even dare ask questions. They simply listened, recorded what they learned, and occasionally looked at her as though facing a living monument. One recruit said, "She taught me to hear the wind bounce off the cliff like she was teaching me to hear myself." The base's veteran marksman, a man who once looked down on her once, found her one evening marking the wind's direction with a piece of string tied to her rifle stock. He stood there, silent, not daring to interrupt. When Erin left, he kept the string, and still uses it to this day. There was only one person who seemed uncomfortable with this transformation: Sergeant Bennett. Not out of jealousy, but because he didn't understand. All his years of teaching, shouting like cannon fire, pushing for results, and yet he was outdone by someone who never raised her voice. Then, during one official session, he witnessed something he could never forget. Erin stepped behind a recruit whose hands trembled from changing wind direction. Without uttering a word, she sat down beside him, picked up a small pebble, and tossed it lightly into the air. The rock veered sharply to the left. The recruit nodded, adjusted his aim, and his shot hit the mark. He nearly couldn't believe it, but when he looked to thank Erin, she was gone. That night, at the base's training BBQ, everyone was granted early leave. Old country music crackled from a speaker hung on a rusted pole. Erin sat at the edge of the yard, with a plate of cold meat and dry bread, as usual. A young instructor quietly set a bottle of water beside her, not saying anything, and then walked away. A very soldierly "thank you." A few recruits approached not to speak, but just to sit a little closer than usual. One of them pulled a bullet from his pocket etched with mysterious words, but then hesitated and tucked it back in. Perhaps he felt it wasn't worthy enough. Erin looked around. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened as if she realized she was no longer invisible. Early morning. Fort Irwin still breathed its wind, but the air had shifted. Not because it was colder, but because people had begun to look at each other differently. The gazes that once passed over Erin as if she were a shadow beyond their sight now slowed. No more frowns of discomfort. No more snickers from behind her back. Just a hushed space, heavy, yet filled with respect. Sergeant Bennett, the same man who had loudly thrown her out of the range, now often stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching when she passed across the training yard. He remained silent. But his gaze was calmer. No more defensiveness. No more arrogance. There was something like remorse, carefully restrained. Erin herself hadn't changed, still folding blankets precisely, still rising before dawn, still cleaning the old M40 rifle, as though it were the only thing anchoring her being. Yet the atmosphere around her had transformed. One day, a high-ranking officer from the Special Operations Command came to inspect, the type of leader who showed up only on graduation day or when something grave had occurred. As he moved across the yard, Aaron taught a group of trainees how to estimate wind speed by watching grains of sand drift through a gap in their boots. She didn't straighten her posture. She didn't turn around. She didn't salute. But when the officer glanced her way, he paused just enough for any soldier to notice. No greeting, no rank mentioned. But that look was the clearest recognition he could offer. Following that day, word spread through the base faster than a desert monsoon. Aaron Shaw Echo Shadow was not just a former SEAL whose name had faded. She was redefining precision not by bullet velocity but by the ability to hear silence. One morning, a trainee scoring a perfect target result at 1,500 meters for the first time was asked who trained him. He replied simply, "She didn't teach me to shoot. She taught me to hear the earth breathe." The training board convened. No one wanted to admit they'd been wrong, but a voice in the room suggested appointing Aaron as an official instructor. Papers were printed, seals prepared, but Aaron declined. Not with explanations, not even in writing. She just stayed silent, and that silence forced others to find a different form of recognition, not through rank but through space. She was granted exclusive use of a corner of the range, a small training shelter jokingly referred to as the Quiet Range. From then on, anyone who wanted to learn could come. No one was compelled to attend. Some called it a sanctuary. Aaron never gave speeches. Yet each time a trainee emerged from the Quiet Range with a quiet smile and calm eyes, it was evident this place taught things conventional lectures never touched. Then one afternoon, a small moment occurred so tiny it might have gone unnoticed. A young female trainee criticized for being too gentle, lacking grit, had missed shots all week. She approached Aaron, expecting nothing. Instead of adjusting her hold or stance, Aaron handed her an aluminum spoon. "Set it on the barrel. Balance it. Don't let it fall." No one understood, but the trainee followed through, and in her next shot, she hit the mark. Not because of the spoon, but because her hand finally stopped trembling. Of course, the story spread, reaching even the oldest instructors, and thus a legend was born of a soldier who didn't teach with theory but by guiding you to discover your own errors. Aaron never appeared at graduation ceremonies. No awards, no fanfare. Yet on the last day of the course, as everyone lined up before the flag, a senior officer quietly stepped forward and left, by Aaron's shelter door, a challenge coin engraved with the training base's name and the words, "Precision is the quietest discipline." Aaron didn't take it. She simply looked, then gently closed the door. The next morning, the coin was gone. No one knew if she'd kept it, but everyone began doing something curious. They carried their own challenge coin in their pocket as a reminder that sometimes a leader needs not speak at all. That morning, a thin veil of fog draped the firing range like a memory suspended in the air. The sun had not yet crept above the horizon, yet on the blur of sand, Aaron's footsteps were already etched, soft, steady, precise. She had not come to display, nor to teach. She came simply to clear. The M40 rifle was placed back into the worn fabric bag, now faded like a weathered flag. The Echo Shadow engraving on the barrel had nearly vanished, only visible when the light hit just right. But today, that didn't matter. For the first time, the rifle was no longer a secret, no longer buried in the past. It stood as evidence of a journey where a soldier chose silence as her tool, and that silence brought an entire base to its knees. As she turned to leave the range, the morning breeze gently lifted the canvas flap above the Quiet Range. Someone had chalked a phrase there. "Not all who are silent have nothing to say." Those words weren't praise. They were acknowledgement. No pomp, no fanfare, but weighty, like a sniper round striking the bullseye. Aaron veered left, Entering the training hall, trainees were practicing breath control, a routine so simple most ignored it. But now, in their eyes was something different, not compulsion, but a quiet that yearned to be discovered, a power that didn't roar, but burned steadily from within. A female trainee who had once cried after her first session sat now with eyes shut, feeling the wind against her back. A young recruit, who lost points for misaligning his shot, placed a hand on the ground to sense the tremor through his palm. They didn't learn to fight, they learned to feel before fighting. In the corner, Sergeant Bennett leaned against the door. He didn't step in, but he didn't walk away. Erin didn't look at him, and she didn't need to. His silent, steady presence was the quietest apology she had ever received. She walked to the front of the class, placed the M40 on a wooden table, and disassembled it piece by piece as one might unpack a memory. Not to repair, but to teach how to reassemble not just a rifle, but a lost faith. Somebody captured that moment in a photo, and within 24 hours it spread across the SEAL community. No caption needed, just an image of a soldier bowing, dismantling her weapon in the early light. And anyone who had walked through combat knew exactly what it meant. At the graduation ceremony weeks later, Erin was absent. She had left the camp silently as she arrived. No one knew where she went. But on her bunk lay a single artifact, a fabric bag empty, except for a small scrap of paper. Precision is not in where you arrive, but how you depart. Months later, Fort Irwin erected a small plaque in a corner of the range. No name, no rank, just engraving. Echo Shadow, the one who showed silence can lead. New recruits often asked, "Who was Echo?" The veterans wouldn't answer right away. They'd simply point to the plaque and say, "The one who made us listen for the first time." And so, the name once buried beneath sand and silence became a flame low, steady, unquenchable. Erin never needed to return. She'd left behind the most essential thing, a way of life, a standard. One late winter afternoon in a small town north of California, a woman in middle age emerged from a second-hand bookstore, the faded fabric bag swinging over her shoulder. Inside were no weapons, just a few books and a pen. She sat on a wooden bench outside, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. Beside her, a young boy aimed at a tin can with a slingshot. She didn't speak, but when he exhaled and released, the pebble flew true, hitting the can dead center, and she quietly nodded. And you, my dear audience, brace yourselves for the next twist in this jaw-dropping story. So, before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you're truly loving what I'm doing here. And drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a thrill to see who's joining us from all corners of the globe. Listen up. The compass tattoo on Riley Carson's abdomen might seem like mere decoration, yet it was the force that turned Fort Irwin's fate upside down. Beneath a scorching 2°C Fahrenheit sun, and with brittle, dried mud cracking under her boots, she watched in silence as hundreds of nameless, rankless recruits trained before her. When 4 soldiers stepped forward to surround her in that deserted mess hall, you would reel at the unexpected power of her quiet strength. If you pass over this story, you'll forever wonder what lessons in courage and genuine respect from an American soldier you've missed. A thin veil of autumn fog still clung to the rolling dunes of the Mojave Desert when a military jeep ground to a halt on the dusty road leading into Fort Irwin, California. In that early hour, shafts of sunlight began to pierce the cactus canopy, casting a golden hue over the gray containers where recruits pushed their bodies to the limit. The shrill blast of the bugle sounded like an invisible command, rousing every sleeper, and was instantly followed by the thunder of boot heels pounding on gravel. Amid the controlled chaos, one pair of observant yet distinctly feminine eyes quietly separated from the perfectly aligned rows of trainees. That stranger, no name tag, no insignia, no rank, stepped out of the jeep with a slender yet resolute frame, her face as calm and implacable as an iceberg. The dawn light caught the gentle curve of a classic compass tattoo on her abdomen, its needle perpetually pointing north. The marking looked like an ancient map, stirring curiosity about the journey that had brought her here, and the path yet to come. No one knew her origin, only the whispers that rippled through the camp. Exercise doctor. Or behavioral analyst from headquarters? In the sweat-streaked ranks of new recruits, Bravo Company stood riveted. Jackson Walker's shoulders spread like fortress walls. Wyatt Hayes flaunted his black belt swagger. Miguel Torres was taciturn but iron-strong, and Tyler Brennan carried a cocky grin as his constant companion. They squinted at her, piecing together the patchwork of rumors. Miguel muttered under his breath, "She must be here to sniff out our flaws," while Tyler scoffed, "Bet she's just tallying our IQ scores." Yet regardless of their snide commentary, she silently opened her black notebook, the pen dancing across the pages. No one knew what filled those pages: breathing rates, sprint times, the flicker of distracted glances, moments of mounting tension, but each figure fanned the embers of Bravo's unease. Then came the trenchant bark of the drill sergeant, his voice deep and icy. "Prepare for the red zone!" Recruits surged forward, boots kicking up dust. Only she remained rooted, her gaze sweeping over the throng as a painter contemplates a canvas. New soldiers couldn't help but curl their lips at the thought, does she ever run? Fort Irwin was notorious for midday temperatures soaring to 113 Fahrenheit, yet the searing sun's fury paled beside the stranger's ice-cold stare. Among those recruits were veterans of Coronado's SEAL boot camp. Others had weathered combat in Iraq, but each one flinched at least once under her scrutiny. And when the command "fall in" rang out, the ranks scattered. Save for her, she strode directly into formation, smoothing her uniform with meticulous care before lowering herself into the starting position. As she dropped into the crouch, arms outstretched to control stopwatch and heartbeat like a compass's steady pull, the air itself seemed to compress. The drill sergeant's shouts faded. Bravo's jeers fell silent. The only sound was ragged breathing and pounding hearts as recruits faced the silent challenge. Will you match her pace? Clearly, this morning's routine was nothing like any before it. An anonymous woman had opened a new chapter for these hardened warriors. A clandestine contest between raw physical power and quiet, unwavering resolve. You won't want to miss what comes next when the stranger steps up to her first true test. The result may well defy every expectation. The moment the silhouette of the stranger settled among the recruits, Fort Irwin seemed to hold its breath. She belonged to no unit, carried no specific assignment. Yet the entire camp knew only of her, a silent woman with a black leather notebook in hand and a pen never abandoned. While drill sergeants bellowed, urging each footstep, she stood at the edge, her gaze tracing every movement of Bravo Company with an inscrutable air. They whispered that she had served as a Marine, even infiltrated Fallujah. Some junior officers murmured, "Perhaps she's here to expose our complacency and arrogance." Occasionally, Jackson Walker would steal a glance, lips pressed tight, wondering if someone who'd never barked a command could truly judge them. She offered no reply, merely scratched notes, breathing patterns, sprint times, the way their eyes flicked across the training ground, every detail dutifully recorded. The rumors only thickened, but she remained mute. On her abdomen, the classic compass tattoo, its lines faded by desert wind and sun, stood out as her lone emblem. An inner compass of the soul, perhaps. Miguel Torres murmured, brushing his finger across the ink. For the briefest instant she looked down, and her eyes darkened with a flicker of memory, something distant calling her name. Then she turned away, resolute as a sandstone monolith at dusk. Fort Irwin's guerrilla world ran on strict rank and discipline. Drill sergeants organized Bravo, Alpha, Delta through obstacle courses, caked sand pits, and rocky ravines. Lieutenant Martinez's calls rang like funeral bells. Stronger, more precise. But whenever recruits searched for support staff, They found only her silhouette, silent and watchful. From the guard tower, Sergeant Ortega squinted down as she passed armored vehicles unmarked by a single scuff. "Have you logged your run today?" he asked. She offered a ghost of a smile, dipped her head, then melted back into the ranks. Her only answer lay in the notebook's latest entries, Jackson 512, Wyatt 458, and the notation, Tyler's mocking grin at 7 seconds post-command. Throughout that first week, when midday temperatures soared to 113 Fahrenheit and sand blistered like searing metal, she never barked orders or unleashed reprimands. One ritual endured. The black notebook cracked open to capture every fleeting moment. On a grueling incline of shifting sand, she would collapse, inhale the desert dust deeply, and press her pen to paper as if refueling her resolve. Her slender hands bore no calluses, yet each stroke was firm, deliberate. Speculation exploded. She must be Navy SEAL to observe so keenly. Or Special Forces, Internal Affairs for the Army, instructor, psychologist, or covert agent. Hypotheses bloomed like desert flowers, bright but fleeting. No one held an answer, only parched throats yearning for a clue. Despite the gossip, she remained unwavering. Occasionally, when Bravo lined up for marksmanship drills, she would weave among them, set the notebook on the shooting bench, lift her gaze to the target, a crisp X, and turn away as silently as she came. Eyes sharp enough to pierce each bullet's trajectory. New recruits whispered, "Is she scoring our aim assist?" One lanky Texan quipped, "She's probably tallying every miss." A camp legend even told of Tyler hurling a pebble toward her boots after an obstacle run, hoping for any reaction. The stone rebounded harmlessly off her heel. She merely shrugged, bent to her notebook, and wrote on. Tyler clapped Miguel on the shoulder. "This one's extraordinary. No expression at all." No one knew what drove her, only that each entry tormented Bravo more than any final exam. When Lieutenant Martinez ordered, "Sprint 200 meters," they launched themselves forward like arrows, hearts pounding like war drums, compelled by fear of her silent judgment. Are you slower than she expects? Yet Fort Irwin's life was not solely harshness and discipline. At night, under hushed lamplight, some recruits gathered to ponder her past, wondering if she'd lost comrades, faced real enemies. One soldier shared a half-joking tale. "I heard she once recorded enemy breathing patterns mid-battle to predict their positions." They laughed softly, yet a chill lingered. The compass tattoo's image haunted their thoughts. In some, Fort Irwin became a world of stark contrasts. Rigid discipline against the enigma of an anonymous recorder. She belonged to no collective, yet held the key to measuring true inner strength. Would you dare overlook the cracks in her armor she has yet to reveal? Might those fractures conceal a painful memory or a life-altering decision? The moment the Mojave sun dipped toward the western horizon, twilight light slanted through the slatted windows of Fort Irwin's mess hall. The bustle of the dinner rush on that fourth night stilled into an uncanny silence. Clatter of trays had nearly ceased, leaving only the flicker of fluorescent bulbs and the shadowy forms of 4 Bravo Company soldiers standing behind her. Jackson, Wyatt, Miguel, and Tyler clustered like lions stalking their prey. On her tray lay only the standard NCO meal: fried rice, boiled chicken breast, and bland steamed vegetables. Jackson tapped her shoulder lightly and whispered, "Hey, Compass Girl, how about we see that notebook?" His words cut through the hush like a gauntlet thrown. She remained motionless, spine straight, eyes serene. Her slender hands did not tremble as she snapped the black notebook closed. Every move she made was precise, from releasing her grip on the pen to the slight flex of her wrist. The would-be paper warriors ground their teeth, raring to snatch the pages for themselves. In a heartbeat, she slung the notebook like a shield, pivoted on her hip with fluid grace to harness momentum, and sent Jackson sprawling onto the table. Trays flew in every direction, chicken breasts skittered across the floor, rice speckled the ceiling. Wyatt lunged in a heroic burst. Miguel roared for dominance, yet within 30 seconds she had dispatched all 3. An exacting knee strike to Wyatt's shoulder nearly floored him with pain. A swift, decisive chokehold left Miguel disoriented, and a sudden hip throw sent Tyler somersaulting across the hall before he tumbled to the ground. He must have thought he'd slipped into an action flick until the harsh reality set in, and he scrambled to his feet, eyes wild with shock. The mess hall lay so still that you could hear Bravo's ragged breathing, scarcely long enough for a single tick of the clock, and all four lay crumpled, clutching their shoulders in agony. The mingled scent of scattered food and metallic trays hung in the air. She gathered her notebook and pen, voice drifting softly. "You're lucky I held back." Those words dropped like ice shards, freezing the atmosphere solid. Not a single recruit dared to challenge her further. The pale lavender dusk outside cast its glow on the compass tattoo revealed beneath her shirt, an alarm bell echoing in every recruit's mind. It was clear. She was neither exercise doctor nor behavioral analyst. She was the judge, executing her verdict with a body honed by fire and combat. Her takedown was neither loud nor brash. It moved with the sleek economy of a dancer, showcasing the precision of a true warrior. The ensuing quiet was not one of submission but of stunned awe. They had just witnessed a military highlight reel in real time, unarmed, flawless, and finished within exactly 40 seconds. After her special roll call, she simply turned on her heel and walked out the door. No one dared stop her. Bravo lay dank and breathless in her wake, questioning whether they'd truly understood what had just transpired, or if they'd fallen for the most spectacular troll Fort Irwin had ever seen. Miguel muttered, "Did we just get owned by her?" Tyler rasped back, "Yeah, and no bruises, just that dull ache. You call that lucky?" Outside the camp, desert winds still rattled through the open windows, and sand sifted across the floor, a fitting backdrop to their disarray. One can't help but wonder, what explanation awaits Bravo for that breathtaking strike? How could she possess such flawless skill, and more importantly, how long did she keep that secret hidden before unleashing it? Early one morning, Fort Irwin lay swathed in a thin veil of mist, as platoons of Army recruits trudged onto the parade ground. Overhead, a training helicopter roared to life and streaked through the mountain pass like a steel arrow. Into that charged stillness strode Captain Marcus Red Turner, his dress uniform immaculate, a thick sealed fax clutched firmly in his hand. Dawn light fractured through the haze, casting a diamond-bright gleam upon the crimson stamp, emblazoned with the words, "Top Secret." Silence shattered like glass in the mess hall. Whispers erupted as if an information bomb had detonated. "What has Captain Turner brought us today? Confidential? Assessment Officer Delta?" Recruits halted mid-step, eyes riveted on the document. In that pregnant pause, Taylor the medic leaned to her colleague and murmured, "Assessment Officer? So exercise doctor is an officer after all." Before the assembly bell could sound, Red ripped open the envelope. The entire formation held its breath. He announced, "Captain Riley Carson, U.S. Navy SEAL, retired. Special Operations Internal Affairs. Code name, Nix." A ripple passed through the ranks, tongues went dry, and the single word SEAL echoed like a sacred motto, conjuring the lore of elite warriors. Bravo Company froze, the four soldiers gawky and disbelieving. Jackson Walker managed a scoff, only to have it choke in his throat. Wyatt Hayes reached to trace the compass tattoo at her waist, then hesitated, struck by awe. Miguel Torres cinched his belt tighter, heart hammering, while Tyler Brennan stood mute, eyes fixed on the faint bruise from her chokehold the night before. Moments stretched into an eternity until Jackson, wry smile curving his lips, swallowed hard and said, "My apologies, ma'am. We were mistaken." Bravo bowed their heads for the first time, yielding respect to a woman who offered no grandstanding. It was not surrender, but the instant birth of genuine reverence. Riley Carson stepped onto the training platform with the poise of a bronze statue. No one commanded her to cease, and none dared protest. She raised her hand toward Bravo. "Assessment complete." Her tone held neither accusation nor triumph, only the clarity of ink upon paper. Lieutenant Martinez, once the voice of thunderous drills, now inclined his head in solemn salute. "Thank you, Captain." The title sounded like ceremony itself, sealing a turning point for Fort Irwin. Surrounding recruits reshaped into a curious arc, not hostile but inquisitive. "SEAL Team 6, have we truly been trained by legend?" She did not smile, merely tilted her head, warmth glimmering in her eyes. Bravo, once brash, stood shoulder to shoulder, like four iron pillars now quietly aflame with newfound purpose, training not just for physical might, but to forge indomitable will. Jackson laid a steadying hand on Tyler's shoulder as if to say, "We've got this." Shortly thereafter, Red Turner called for an internal briefing. Facts duly signed, Riley Carson prepared to debrief. The entire camp gathered in the auditorium, lights blazing, chairs aligned with military precision. On the screen loomed her compass tattoo, code NIX pulsing softly beside it. When Riley ascended the dais, she neither waved nor discoursed at length. Instead, she played a brief video, a high-definition, slow-mo record of her 40-second takedown of Bravo. The rasp of heavy breathing, the recruits' stunned faces, the lightning hip turn, all served as indisputable testimony to her prowess. Video ended. Riley lifted her black notebook. The final page bore a single maxim: "Discipline must be chosen, not imposed." Those 6 words struck the audience like a hammer blow. Hundreds stood in silence, some furrowed brows, others nodded slowly, for the power of her message eclipsed any shouted command. The briefing broke. Recruits streamed back to the training ground, voices no longer loud with orders but hushed with purpose. They squared their shoulders, tied boots with deliberate care, each footstep heavy with fresh resolve. Bravo led the way, moving in steady, measured cadence as if guided by an unseen compass, eyes glancing toward Riley, sharing a look of profound respect. In the hallway, soldiers passed a large portrait of Riley mounted on the wall, captioned, "Captain Riley Carson, igniting inner strength." That poster became Fort Irwin's new rallying cry. In the days to follow, her compass tattoo would be reproduced on every training manual, every slogan, every campfire tale. Bravo Company, once mockers, now served as unofficial mentors, sharing her techniques for combat breathing, reflex drills, and safeguarding the compass that drove them. They never imagined themselves in that role, yet now they wore their pride in service like a second skin. As the late afternoon sun swept across the slopes of the Rock Mountain Range, Riley Carson allowed Bravo no moment's respite. "This afternoon, Bravo Company will join me in a simulated hostage rescue," she announced. Her sand-smeared paper map spread across the rough timber table of an abandoned outpost shelter. No logistical support, only a drone helicopter and a compass. The Nevada heat burned like flame, muffling the ragged breaths of Viper Squad, the 4 who had once been Bravo and now bore a new mission. Jackson Walker set the tempo with steady stride. Wyatt Hayes wrestled with the rescue kit strapped to his back. Tyler Brennan gripped the tracking radar like a lifeline, while Miguel Torres advanced with deliberate caution, each step measured against the molten sand. Their formation threaded through a suffocating gorge, sheer walls rising on one side, a yawning drop on the other. Every jagged boulder loomed as a stern reminder. One false move could cost a mile of progress. Carson led the way, her lithe figure gliding like a desert cat, eyes scanning for signs of their host, a single olive green bag slung in a rocky niche ahead. Suddenly, Miguel's foot slipped. A cracking snap echoed, and the men halted. Pain etched across his face, an ankle sprain sharp and unignorable. Without complaint, Jackson dropped to one knee and hoisted Miguel onto his shoulders as if carrying precious cargo. Wyatt leapt forward to secure the rescue pack, while Tyler's gaze remained glued to the radar, charting any further hazards. Sunlight blazed against the compass tattoo, etched on Riley's midriff. They had but one choice: move as one, toward one objective. They pressed forward as a single unit, each footfall heavy yet purposeful, only the soft hiss of sand under combat boots and ragged inhalations breaking the desert's hush. At the mouth of the small cavern, Riley halted, stooped, and undid the bindings. Inside lay the host, a camouflaged mannequin slumped against the stone wall, head swathed in cloth, hands bound from behind. Riley bent low, unthreaded the rope's harsh knots, her eyes glinting with that unmistakable spark of duty fulfilled. She guided the mannequin out, one hand steadying the simulated firearm holster, the other offering the illusion of comfort to her team. When the drone helicopter appeared overhead, its rotors rasping like an urgent call to action, Riley did not wait for orders. She surged forward, tank top riding up to reveal the compass tattoo as the drone's scanner locked on the mission code. In that instant, a gust of mountain wind snatched Wyatt's pack and sent Riley's hastily drawn map tumbling into the rocks. The sudden gale yanked Riley off balance, the compass on her skin quivering like a heartbeat beneath her shirt. Without hesitation, she lunged, one arm clutching the drone transmitter to her chest, the other diving between stones to retrieve the lost map. Miguel's groan of pain from the ankle echoed faintly, but Riley could not afford concern. Gravity was but a test beside her duty. Tyler and Jackson sprang into action. Tyler wedged a pry bar under the radar cable, bracing Riley upright. Jackson slipped an arm around her waist, guiding her onto firmer ground. Wyatt, ever vigilant, snatched the map from beneath a stone shard. They maneuvered in a protective arc around Riley, shielding her from any falling debris. In that swirl of dust trailing the drone's passage, Bravo's eyes met Riley's not with awe, but with an understanding of what it means to be truly tested as a team. They absorbed the profound lesson. Leadership is not podium-bound, but forged alongside one's comrades under fire. When Riley and the host were led into a safe zone, a flat clearing barely large enough for the drone to land, she gently set down the mannequin and wiped grit from her brow. Viper 3 gathered behind her, their gazes heavy yet brimful of newfound respect. Jackson stepped forward in silent salute, his subtle nod speaking volumes of approval. Riley needed no further commendation. She simply looked at her four teammates. There, the compass tattoo gleamed brighter in the golden dusk. She inclined her head with quiet finality. Let's head back. As the squad retraced their steps across the heated sands, they were no longer the brash recruits of Bravo but Viper 3, silent warriors bound by duty and trust. From the Mojave Desert to the Rocky Mountains, their story would inspire any who dared to push beyond their own horizons. Barely 2 hours after Viper 3 returned to Fort Irwin, the atmosphere had transformed completely. Word spread like wildfire through the briefing room, along the rows of gray containers. And even across the secure radio channels, Riley Carson was Captain SEAL. The same recruits who had mocked her now snapped to attention, saluting as she passed, their scorn replaced by unmistakable respect. The drill instructors, men as unyielding as steel who had once wielded fire and brimstone commands across the desert valley, now furrowed their brows in approval. Lieutenant Martinez shot Carson a grudging nod. I have never seen internal assessments conducted so effectively. That acknowledgement rang louder than any ovation usually reserved for flawless physical tests. Even the four soldiers of Bravo Company Jackson, Wyatt, Miguel, and Tyler found themselves bowing their heads more than once. They drew their notebooks and scribbled diligently. The concept of the inner compass, imprinted by Riley before the rescue exercise, had become their guiding principle. Each note deconstructed her choice of silence over shouting and her ability to wield discipline as an act of will rather than a shouted order. At the internal debriefing, Colonel Wilson stepped to the podium, his voice deep and resonant. What we have learned in this single week is more valuable than a month of conventional training. He pointed to the honors board, Riley Carson was embossed in bold beneath, Assessment Officer Delta. Every eye in the hall turned to her. Riley glanced back and offered a modest, almost reluctant smile, as though the praise were a trivial matter. Not only Bravo Company and the drill instructors, but the newest recruits clamored for commemorative pins. The badge bore an exact replica of Riley's compass tattoo, its needle veering toward the heart instead of true north. Below it read, "Find yourself before you lead others." Wearing that tiny pin on their uniforms became a solemn rite, more coveted than any shiny medal. That night, around the campfire's golden glow, Viper 3 sat encircled by their peers. Jackson flipped his notebook to the value of silence page and spoke softly of the canyon rescue. A few new soldiers chuckled. "We thought paper maps were obsolete. Now we see that an internal compass is the only tool that never fails." Even the medic, whose stoic countenance rarely flickered, nodded appreciatively toward Riley. Carson's lesson in patience and resolve applies to emergency care as well. It was a curious yet graceful shift. The toughest men at Fort Irwin now spoke in gentler tones, as though liberated from the shackles of their own pride. The next morning, drums and bugles heralded the unit's march, yet Riley did not lead the procession. She walked in the center, subtly yielding shoulder space to Jackson on her left and Wyatt on her right, as if to underscore a single truth. Achievement is never the work of one individual alone. As Bravo 3 filed past the reviewing stand, the compass pin caught the early sun, and Riley saluted with calm dignity. Unlike the grand gestures of other heroes, hers carried the quiet weight of genuine leadership. Later, high in the command center, Riley's portrait was unveiled against a backdrop of desert maps, captioned simply, "Captain Riley Carson, igniting inner strength." A handful of senior officers stepped forward, requesting her to train the next wave of platoons. They queued respectfully, not for medals, but for the opportunity to learn the art of choosing discipline. In the days that followed, the tale of her 40-second takedown and the inner compass echoed from the barracks to the guard towers, from the firing range to the training library. They immortalized the compass in every training file until a legendary recruit tried to pin a counterfeit badge on his helmet, only to be ordered to kneel until Riley's next session. He grimaced through the reprimand, yet never dared remove the symbol from his chest. And so the story did not end at Fort Irwin. When Viper 3 deployed to real-world operations, each new recruit wore the compass pin like a solemn vow. "I will navigate my own path." As for Riley Carson, her lithe silhouette against the Mojave sunrise, she stepped quietly into the fort's history, her mission accomplished. One golden October afternoon, a warm breeze swept through the cracks in the Mojave Desert sands, and brittle tamarisk leaves rattled across the dusty trail that led into Fort Irwin. In that quiet expanse, Riley Carson returned to the desert that had first witnessed her steps as the stranger. Just outside the camp, a simple wooden bench stood in the shadow of a towering cactus. Carved across the bench's weathered surface were 4 unadorned words, heavy with meaning: inner compass. Riley settled onto the bench and placed a gentle hand upon her abdomen, where the famous compass tattoo had become the stuff of camp legend. Now the compass was no longer merely an instrument pointing north, but a reminder that the journey of self-discovery mattered as much as any campaign beyond these sands. Unlike the cool hush of that rescue night, autumn's afternoon offered a soothing warmth. Riley closed her eyes, inhaled slowly, remembering those early days when new recruits whispered guesses at her identity. Exercise doctor, special forces, internal affairs operative. In truth, those labels were but veils erected for a world that craved a hero, yet had never suspected they were to be led by a willowy yet unbreakable woman. From a distance, the soft click of boots on dirt announced the approaching formation. The new recruits advanced in deliberate steps, each footfall resolute. They halted before Riley, eyes shining with determination. No words were exchanged, only a collective salute, offered not out of deference to rank, but in homage to the warrior spirit now awakened within them. Riley's compass tattoo flickered faintly in the sunset glow, completing the cycle from silent observation to recognition of inner strength. Some seasoned instructors seized the moment. One discreetly knelt to relace Riley's boot. Another draped a light jacket over her shoulders, a small gesture, yet brimming with warmth. In place of empty praise, they simply nodded. We may lack many things, but we will always carry our compasses within. Even the 4 former Bravo Company soldiers, now informal trainers, gathered around the bench. Jackson handed Riley a photograph, capturing the 5 of them standing behind the rescued mannequin in the canyon, an immortalized tableau in bronze tones. Wyatt grinned softly, pointing out the inscription, Viper 3 etched beneath. Miguel gently looped the compass pin around Riley's neck, an emblem of the mission they had just completed. Tyler, once skeptical, now pressed his fingertip against Riley's tattoo as if to touch its source of power. Emotion flickered across his face. We have found our own compasses. Together, they rose and formed a small circle around the cactus, each linking arms in a ritual honoring the inner journey they had conquered. In that frame of gold light and whispering wind, Riley offered her first genuine smile, not a shield against doubt, but a warm acknowledgement of the team. She exhaled with relief, as though a mountain of responsibility had rolled from her shoulders. The Navy SEAL mantle dissolved, revealing a woman both vulnerable and formidable, her humanity shining through. As dusk settled, the recruits dispersed, leaving Riley alone with the cactus's shadow. The desert breeze continued its murmured song, stirring tamarisk leaves along the trail. Riley's compass tattoo quivered under her tank top, no longer a mark of duty, but an affirmation. Each step forward from here would be guided by the self she had unearthed, charting her own course amid life's shifting sands. The story of Fort Irwin concludes here, yet the journey of the inner compass has only just begun.
She doesn't belong on the battlefield anymore. Someone as weak as her should stick to desk work. They sneered, words that once cut straight into Captain Olivia Hart's heart. After years of combat in the Middle East, she had been pushed into a media post at Fort Bliss, Texas, surrounded by press releases and quiet office cameras. Then, on a blistering afternoon, the radio crackled with a broken distress call, gunfire bleeding through from the Fillmore Canyon. But fate wasn't finished. An ambush erupted in the White Sands training area. As the desperate call came again from the Oregon Mountains, 2 groups of American soldiers trapped under heavy fire. When every desperate glance searched for help that wasn't coming fast enough, Olivia stood up. In that moment, she was no longer the one behind the camera, but the only warrior willing to charge into the kill zone. Olivia Hart was remembered as a name that had long faded into the background. At Fort Bliss, among sun-drenched barracks and the low roar of helicopters, she was nothing more than the image of a veteran sitting behind a desk, editing reports and polishing internal news bulletins. Yet her past told a different story. Once a combat soldier in the U.S. Army, present in the fiercest campaigns in Iraq and Syria, Fallujah had left a wound on her shoulder that would never fully heal, along with a decision that forced her away from the front lines. At 36, Olivia's build was ordinary enough to be overlooked. 5'6", 128 pounds. Without the hulking physique or glittering medals to display. But the keen-eyed noticed, each morning while the base still slept, she trained with iron-disciplined push-ups, rope climbs, pull-ups, every movement executed with the precision of her battlefield days. On the firing range, her bullets cut the air dead center into the target, so steady that many recruits turned their heads. Her recall of terrain and tactics was near flawless, a living map. Still, to her fellow soldiers, those qualities carried the label, old habits of a former soldier. In their eyes, Olivia's prime was over. Her skills just relics of a past that no longer mattered. In tactical briefings, she sat at the edge of the table, listening, taking notes, delivering meticulous reports, but when missions began, she was never chosen for the assault team. She was communications logistics, not the kind of warrior who stepped into the kill zone. The whispers behind her back only deepened the divide. Too soft to stomach the smell of blood, better with a camera than a rifle. Such words stuck in her memory like barbed thorns, reminding her she'd been boxed into a role so safe it felt suffocating. Yet rather than fight back with noise, she stayed silent, storing every shard of strength within. Because Olivia knew the battlefield wasn't always out there, sometimes it came knocking right in the middle of the safe zone, and only those ready would survive. She trained not to prove anything to anyone, but so she would never betray herself. Amid the steady rhythm of life at Fort Bliss, no one imagined that one day, every skill they dismissed would become a lifeline for many. And when the summer sun poured fire over the Chihuahuan desert, fate began to shift. A sudden distress signal echoed from afar, a situation no one on base had been prepared for. Would Olivia remain on the sidelines, or was this the moment she would shatter every prejudice pressing down on her?
Welcome to Veteran Best Stories, where the war ends, but the stories live on. From the foxholes to front porches, we honor the silent battles our veterans still fight. Subscribe and walk with us beyond the battlefield.
That afternoon, the New Mexico sky felt sealed beneath a sheet of dry glass, the sun's heat slicing through every breath. At White Sands Missile Range, the thunder of artillery and live rounds from the 3rd Cavalry Regiment's training exercise rolled across the White Sand Valley. But within minutes, the air changed entirely. From the blurred southern horizon, an armed militia slipped across the border, blending into the dust and smoke of the live-fire drill. The official exercise ended, and the real nightmare began. A reconnaissance unit was cut off from the formation, their radio signal breaking apart in fragments. In another direction, several ridgelines away, a detachment from the 5th Special Forces Group was running a covert training scenario in the Oregon Mountains. They didn't yet know they had walked into a full ambush, with all communications to base severed. Every passing minute drew them closer to the edge of life and death. Back at Fort Bliss, the communications command room became a hive of chaos. Screens lit up with a tangle of warning signals, digital maps flickering with red blips moving erratically. Duty officers strained to maintain contact, but the distance and treacherous terrain meant reinforcements were hours away. In war, hours are more than enough for everything to end permanently. Olivia sat at the coordination desk, headset pressed tight, listening to each fragment of radio transmission swallowed by wind and distant gunfire. The voice of a Special Forces sergeant cut through hoarse, broken from blood loss, only a few words audible, then silence. In that moment, Olivia didn't just hear the sound, she saw the terrain in her mind, every slope, every ravine, every pocket between boulder fields where echoes carried. She had been there before for months, training and memorizing every detail to survive. The familiarity surged through her like an electric current. No one in the room knew both danger zones as well as she did. But here, Olivia was only a communications officer. Her job was to relay information, not carry a weapon. Others would be sent in men whose map was nothing more than flat lines on a screen. The wall clock ticked in slow, deliberate beats, but to Olivia each strike was a gunshot cutting down the time left for those trapped out there. Heat flared in her veins, and battlefield memories came roaring back, not the shouts of victory, but the time she'd arrived too late, when only silence and the vacant faces of her comrades remained. She rose from her seat, moving quietly to the map table. The officers stayed locked on the shifting signals, arguing over options. No one noticed how her eyes had changed. In her mind, routes of approach aligned, invisible markers tagged possible ambush points, and a plan took shape faster than she could reach for a pen. This time, She wasn't going to sit and wait for the final report, because she knew if she let this moment pass, there would be no chance to reclaim all the years she'd been underestimated. The only question left was, would Olivia cross the line between support staff and lifesaver? And if she did, what would it cost her? All right, my dear audience, you're still with me, aren't you? Drop a 1 in the comments if you're hooked and want to hear what happens next. Not everyone has the courage to break a direct order, especially in the military, where discipline binds every action. But Olivia knew there were moments when obeying meant signing her comrades' death warrants. The image on the tactical display burned in her mind. 2 groups of American soldiers pressed into a narrow gap between a cliff wall and the valley floor. A sheer drop behind them. Enemy rifles hidden ahead. If they waited for reinforcements, time itself would become an invisible killer. She no longer heard the chatter around her, only her heartbeat, steady yet pounding, like a war drum. With deliberate movements, Olivia shrugged into a frayed-edge ballistic vest, slung a heavy medical pack over her shoulder, and gripped her M4A1, the weapon she had quietly maintained like a sacred ritual, even after years of being barred from the battlefield. Her teammates' stunned eyes followed her as she turned toward the door. They knew she was doing what no one else dared, and they also knew no one could stop her. Once Olivia decided, she was a storm. Before leaving the room, she left the duty officer with one short sentence heavy as a command. They don't need a report. They need someone there now. The MRZR's engine roared under her hands as it tore across the gravel trails of the New Mexico desert. Afternoon sunlight poured in gold streaks over the parched landscape. Desert wind whipped her face, and sand streamed into the gaps of her helmet. But Olivia didn't blink. Her memory, sharpened by hundreds of hours of training, painted every bend, every incline, every rock outcropping where she could hide if she had to. The Oregon mountains were a maze of stone and shadow. For strangers, it was a doorway to a silent death. For Olivia, it was an old diary written in sweat, blood, and sleepless nights. Every ridge she crested brought back nights of marching under the moon, when her breath curled white in the cold wind, and the grind of sand under her boots ticked down the seconds of a life-or-death mission. Near the danger zone, she slowed, killed the lights, and let the engine idle low in the fading light. From far off came a few short bursts of gunfire, tight, urgent, signaling the firefight had reached its peak. Olivia eased the vehicle beside a massive boulder, checked her magazines, and tightened the straps on her medical pack. One deep breath, and she slid to the ground, moving in silence like a shadow. She took the long way around, climbing along a narrow mountainside where jagged rock faces were just high enough to hide her profile. Every step was a calculation of weight, sound, and distance, a skill no satellite map or rescue team could duplicate. When she reached a vantage point over the valley, she realized the situation was worse than she'd imagined. The recon team was cornered in a dead-end pocket, and the Special Forces detachment was split in two, one half wounded and pinned behind a rock, the other returning fire with dwindling strength. In that moment, Olivia understood. She had one chance to cut into the chaos, deliver bandages and ammo to the right hands at the right time. Everything else, including her own life, came after that. And as she slid down the slope into the haze of smoke and grit, one quiet question rang like a bell in her head. Would this return save them, or erase Olivia's name from the records forever? The gunfire echoing from Fillmore Canyon struck like hammers against bone, relentless and merciless. Each shot was a reminder that time was shrinking, that every passing second was another chance slipping away for the men pinned under enemy fire. Through her binoculars, Olivia saw the chaos clearly. the Special Forces team trapped in a dead corner, with nowhere left to fall back. 2 men lay motionless in dark pools of blood, while the remaining 3 fought desperately, returning fire and using bare hands to stem the bleeding of their wounded. Above them, more than a dozen enemy shooters held the high ground, their positions locked on the trapped soldiers like predators with prey in their sights. But Olivia didn't charge in blindly. Combat experience had taught her that reckless moves only added to the casualty count. She slipped deeper into a rock crevice, switched to a secure military radio frequency, and called in the artillery at Donna Ana range. Her voice was low, clipped, and absolute, the kind of order that left no room for debate, and she relayed target coordinates accurate to the meter. Few knew a communications officer like her could work with such precision. It was a skill carried over from years spent embedded with frontline units. The artillery answered almost immediately. Shells screamed through the air, detonating against the mountainsides, shaking the earth beneath her. Sand and stone exploded upward, and smoke blanketed the enemy's line of sight. Within seconds, their firing positions fell into disorder, their fire scattered, and that was the opening Olivia had been waiting for. She swung around onto an old, nearly forgotten trail, known only to those who had camped or patrolled there for years. The slope was steep, narrow, and slick, but Olivia moved as if the path had been carved into her memory. Every step was a calculation of time. A moment too slow could mean death. A moment too fast could mean exposure. Closing in on the trapped unit, Olivia burst from between the rocks like an arrow, drawing startled looks from the soldiers holding their line. Without asking questions, she dropped to her knees beside the most critically wounded. His shirt was soaked through with blood, his face pale to the edge of gray. One glance told her everything: shattered pelvis, high risk of rapid blood loss. The second casualty, just a few steps away, gasped for breath, each exhale bubbling a clear sign of a punctured lung. Shutting emotion out, Olivia worked like a machine programmed for moments like this. She signaled the remaining 3 soldiers to set up overlapping fields of fire for cover. With one hand, she wrapped a pressure bandage, stabilizing the injury with whatever material she had in her medical pack. Then, without hesitation, she bent and heaved the 90-kilogram soldier onto her shoulders. The weight crushed into her spine and squeezed every breath, but her muscles had long been conditioned for this burden in years of punishing training. She chose to extract along the southern trail, dangerous, but less prone to ambush. Her boots pounded against the dirt, the crack of gunfire still snapping behind her, each heartbeat thundering like a war drum, urging her forward. Sweat and desert dust turned a briny grit on her lips, but Olivia never slowed. Every meter gained was another step away from the kill zone. As their figures slipped into the shadow of the mountains, the echoes of explosions still rolled across the canyon, mingling with the cold hiss of the wind. In that moment, Olivia knew she had crossed a line no one could return from unchanged. And a quiet question seeped into her thoughts. Would this rescue be only the beginning of a larger battle still waiting ahead? Now, back to the heart of the story. Take a deep breath before we continue. Pause for a second to hit subscribe or drop a comment with your location and the time you're watching. I'm glad to have you alongside for every step of this journey. From the base of Fillmore Canyon to the helicopter landing zone was barely 800 meters, yet to Olivia, it was longer than any journey she had ever taken. Ahead lay an open stretch, stripped bare under a blinding sun, no tree, no boulder, large enough to shield them from the rain of gunfire sweeping across it. Every step forward was a gamble with death. Olivia took point, body low, moving in short bursts. She picked each temporary cover carefully, firing short, precise bursts that forced the enemy's heads down, carving out brief windows for the wounded to cross. The air was thick with the acrid bite of gunpowder, and the heat of spent rounds mingled with the copper scent of fresh blood seeping from makeshift stretchers. 200 meters from the LZ, a sharp, dry crack split the air, and Olivia felt her left shoulder tear open. The impact staggered her, her breath catching in her throat, but battlefield instinct shoved the pain aside. Stopping meant death for the men she was shielding, and for herself. She refused to slow, shifting her rifle to her right hand, firing off balance yet still sharp enough to keep the enemy pinned. The three wounded behind her couldn't move on their own. Gritting her teeth, Olivia hoisted two of them onto her shoulders like sacks of living sand, their weight crashing down on her injured side until her vision blurred. The third, his legs nearly useless, she kept at her hip, his arm slung over her remaining shoulder. The four of them clung together as one mass, moving through the storm of rounds ripping the air, bullets punching into the dirt around them with needle-sting fury. Stone and dust exploded under suppressive fire from the ridges above. Every time she lifted her foot, hot grit and rock fragments lashed her face, but she didn't turn back, didn't glance over her shoulder. Ahead, the LZ emerged, a ragged patch of earth scarred by earlier shelling, now drowned in the rotor thunder of a UH-60 Black Hawk drive opping in. The rotor wash struck them like a whip, blasting sand into a choking haze. The helicopter shuddered violently as the pilot held it low, giving the medics just seconds to leap out and sprint toward them. Olivia didn't slow, even as every step drove a knife deeper into her shoulder. Only when a medic's hands gripped her and dragged the wounded away did she allow herself a heartbeat's pause. But instead of stepping straight onto the bird, Olivia turned back, rifle raised toward the canyon mouth, laying down suppressive fire until the last Special Forces soldier was aboard. Only when the door slammed shut, the engine roared, and the Black Hawk lifted free did she let the weapon fall from her hands, her left shoulder trembling under the weight of blood-soaked fabric. From above, Fillmore Canyon shrank into a dark scar beneath the blazing Sunday. The ache in her body mingled with something else, the quiet certainty that, at least today, no one had been left behind. And somewhere deep inside her, the initial haze faded, and Olivia awoke in the pale light of Fort Bliss's field hospital, the steady beep of a heart monitor echoing like a distant drum. White bandages wrapped her left shoulder and arm, each breath searing the wound, but what anchored her to reality wasn't the pain. It was the faces she'd seen make it out of Fillmore Canyon alive. In that moment, she knew she'd traded a part of herself to protect something far greater: lives and trust between soldiers. News of the rapid extraction and Olivia's daring actions spread through the unit like wildfire. Barracks hallways buzzed with talk of the former communications veteran who had crossed open ground under fire to shield a group of wounded. The base command initially opened an investigation for leaving her assigned post, a charge that could end any military career. But when the Special Forces team's report came in, each line confirmed it. Without Olivia, at least 2 men would not have returned. The investigation closed, and the outcome turned her life onto a new path. Olivia was awarded the Bronze Star with Valor, a medal reserved for those who display extraordinary bravery under fire. The ceremony was simple, without speeches, but the eyes of the soldiers around her said it all. True respect needs no fanfare. As her injury healed, Olivia received an unexpected offer to train new Special Forces units in survival tactics. No longer on the sidelines, she stepped into the role of warrior instructor, passing on lessons paid for in blood and time. On the training grounds, she taught more than stealth or accuracy. She taught what couldn't be measured: calm in chaos, resolve when everything collapses, and the unbreakable duty to leave no one behind. A year later, Olivia returned to the battlefield, not to pull a trigger, but to sit at the planning table. Maps spread wide, her finger traced escape routes, defensive positions, and critical timings for suppressive fire. During hostage rescues, her voice carried the weight of someone who had run through a kill zone and come back. Each successful mission proved that battlefield experience, when shared the right way, could save more lives than any bullet. Over time, Olivia's story became legend at Fort Bliss. Recruits whispered about the advisor who dragged 3 men across open ground in a rain of gunfire, while veterans nodded at her name as if to say, strength isn't about muscle, rank, or medals. It's about the moment you decide not to stand still when your comrades need you. From a communications veteran once dismissed, Olivia Hart became the symbol of the base, the one they called when a situation broke the rule book. And to her, it was never a story about glory. It was about duty. About living in a way that honored those who never made it back. Some battlefield stories aren't just about bullets and explosions, but about decisions made in the thin line between life and death. Olivia Hart's story reminds us that true courage isn't the absence of fear, it's feeling the fear and moving forward anyway for someone else. It's choosing to place the lives of others above your own safety and accepting the cost to keep your oath. That lesson isn't just for those in uniform. In everyday life, each of us has our own Fillmore Canyon situations where we must decide, watch, or act, stay silent, or speak out, retreat, or step forward. And that choice defines who we are. If this story resonates with you, leave a comment below. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between your own safety and the good of someone else? What did you decide? Share your thoughts, or tag a friend in the US who you believe needs to hear this story today.